Thank you for joining me today. We are here with Jeff Zipp, who is a Canadian/American record producer, audio engineer, and musician. He has owned and operated Light Machine Records, a Vancouver, BC-based boutique studio where he has recorded, produced, and mixed music for many independent and signed artists, as well as recording music for TV shows such as the ABC Disney Big Sky and CBS The Amazing Race USA. Once graduated from high school, Jeff started playing guitar for bands in Vancouver, one of which was signed to 604 Records. Through the connection at the record label, he began playing for a large number of their signed artists and touring across Canada. Soon he began doing recording sessions at studios such as Mushroom, Little Mountain Studios, and The Armory, where he fell in love with the studio recording process, and he went on to build his first studio at the illustrious age of 24, where he would hone his craft until finally opening Light Machine Records in 2018. Jeff has now worked on music that has amounted to millions of streams worldwide and earned his first platinum certified single for sales of Danny and Lizzie Dancing in the Sky. In 2023, Wesley Atu's song Where Do We Go From Here was used by Netflix Outer Banks Season 3, which he produced and mixed at Light Machine Records. Jeff has worked in over 25 countries around the world, recording music and sound mixing for TV shows and films. Some recent highlighted TV film credits include the Disney Plus Percy Jackson BTS, CBS's The Amazing Race USA, ABC's Big Sky, Entertainment One's Border Security America's Frontline, and Netflix's Outer Banks. That's actually weird to say in the possessive. Netflix's Outer Banks, but you know what I'm getting at. Thanks for joining me today, Jeff. Yeah, you too. It's before we hit go, we were saying it's been a minute since we've seen each other.
Well, thanks for having me. It's nice chatting with you.
You think it's that long?
Yeah, it's got to be around 2016.
Yeah,
probably,
maybe.
right? I think so. That I've seen you in person, probably. Yeah, 'cause I think we've chatted a little bit on like text messages and social media, but that's about it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time here. So, do you want to tell us your story briefly for listeners who might be having their first introduction to you today? A bit about who you are and your journey in the biz, how you got where you are today.
Sure, yeah. I guess through and through, I'm a music producer, engineer, and mixer, and I spend about half my time here in the recording studio, recording bands, like you had mentioned, and then the other half I spend on the road working on TV shows, doing audio and recording music for them. And basically, my journey has just been me trying everything that I possibly can to not have to go back to building houses in the rain. I got my red seal for carpentry back when I was in my early 20s, and I realized very quickly that it wasn't my thing. I was always really drawn to music, and so it's just been out of me being stubborn that I've just kind of held on to this, this music thing. And it's, every year it just gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, and again, just before we hit record, we were talking about the fact that, you've had a lot of like pretty cool opportunities over the last few years and how that has come out of just saying yes and being willing to do things that were maybe a little bit outside of the expected pathway or the, outside of the norm maybe or whatever, but those end up being some of the greatest experiences, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And like we were chatting before we hit record, I was mentioning that, it seemed like no matter how hard I tried to contact people or send my resumes out to work in studios or maybe assistant engineer for a band or do live audio sort of things, no matter how many resumes I sent out, I never really seemed to get any replies back. So I realized that I kind of just had to carve my own path. And I realized that with building my own thing and just creating a job for myself, I wouldn't have to rely on other people saying, "Hey, you should do this for us," or "Hey, you're talented enough. Can you work with us on this?" And then, just as you start to get better at your craft, more opportunities come your way, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So Here on the Vocal Lab, we aim to shine a light into the industry through the lens of what I know now that I wish I'd known then. So, with that in mind, if you were starting all over again, do you want to talk about what you do differently and what you do the same?
Right. It's that's a tough question because I don't know if I would do anything necessarily differently. There are
Hmm.
definitely things that maybe that were speed bumps along the way, but I think that those sort of speed bumps kind of just ended up, making me who I am. So I don't think I would
Hmm.
change anything. But that being said, when I was quite young, I would have been just coming out of high school, and I was in a band, and we kind of wanted to be, the Stooges or Ziggy Stardust or
Hmm.
Exile on Main Street, Rolling Stones era, and we got approached by a record producer, and he had a lot of bigger credits and whatever, and he really promised us kind of the world. And at this time, I think we were ready to record. We had spent a few years of rehearsing and playing as many shows as possible. Like basically all he would have had to have done was just hit record, and we would have
Hmm.
probably been happy. It might not have been like a great record, but we would have been at least happy. But unfortunately, we didn't really do our due diligence and look into this person to make sure that he was even creatively in line with what we wanted to be. And we learned very quickly that he was a very heavy-handed producer, and it was very much my way or the highway,
Hmm.
which I think is I think that that's the reality of the way that some people produce records.
Hmm.
It's not that I'm not faulting him for it. It just wasn't what we had initially thought we were kind of signing on for.
Hmm.
And it went from us really feeling like we had something special to every bit of joy being kind of taken away
Mm.
from the whole thing. And that was kind of my first big lesson. I realized very quickly that in order for you to before you ever let anyone creatively into your sort of world or your camp, you need to make sure that you're 100% aligned with what they are bringing to the table.
Hmm.
And the reason that I say I wouldn't do anything differently is because out of that is what created the necessity for me to learn how to record music.
Yeah.
And it really taught me that, I mean, if that was our experience, I'm sure there's a lot of other bands that have gone through a very similar thing or felt the same way. So kind of moving forward, I always wanted to provide a space, where people can come in and be vulnerable, and my job is to tell their story rather than me imprinting my sound on their story.
Hmm.
Right.
I love
So, I
that.
mean, yeah, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, that was an unfortunate circumstance, but I don't think I would ever change anything because that was a damn good lesson to learn.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
really important lesson to learn. And like you say, out of that grew a whole different avenue of learning for you that has turned into like a really big part of your career, right? That
Mhm.
learning to record audio and engineering and producing and all of that grew out of that experience. And who knows, one way or the other, whether you would have ended up there anyway or not, but it has certainly impacted the direction of your career.
That's right. Yeah. Kind of a funny sort of story is that through that band is how I actually met the band that was signed to 604 because we were playing at the same show. So in reality, that producer actually created that show as well. So in reality, I probably wouldn't have met the 604 band
Yeah.
if it hadn't have been for that producer. It's weird how things kind of just connect in a strange, bizarre way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in this industry, there's lots of different levels of education, right? Around music. Well, and I my guess is the technical knowledge around the recording process as well. So some very formal education and some very self-taught musicians and engineers, and some of both of those things happen through more of a mentorship kind of situation. What did your education look like in that respect? How has that impacted your work in the interim?
Well, I would definitely say I took the hardest route possible. I I don't come from a family where there's ever been people that have ever been professionally involved in music,
Yeah.
so there was really no blueprint of what I should do or how I should go about achieving a certain goal. So, like I said earlier, I got my ticket in carpentry because I really believed that having a fallback plan was like the most important thing,
Hmm.
which looking back on it, I was spending 8 hours to 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week working on my backup plan when in reality I should have been working on what I was really, really passionate about,
Yeah.
So, so yes, not coming from a music family, I also didn't really ever, it was never really on my radar, the possibility of even going to a music school or an audio engineering school. I didn't really know what that was. I didn't really understand what a producer was. I just, it all seemed like it was an unrealistic goal. So basically what I would do is I would build a house or work in a construction thing, and then I would rush home and I would hop on Pro Tools, and I would learn how to program on Pro Tools, or like read about microphones, or
Hmm.
do whatever I could to just pick up whatever information I could to just get better at it.
Hmm.
um I and it kind of went on like that for many years, and then it got to the point where maybe I would get a job, or working on a song for a small sort of project. They'll give you $100. I'm like,
Yep.
great. So I'll take a week off of work, and hopefully that'll the $100 will survive me for that week, and then I'll really focus in on the music stuff. And it kind of just snowballed to, okay, well, now I'm maybe getting a project that can maybe pay me a little bit more, or maybe I've saved up a little bit of money from doing carpentry, so I'm just going to take a little bit more time off from
Hmm.
work and spend more time on music. And every single time it just kind of got like longer and longer periods,
Hmm.
where all of a sudden now I look back and, oh my gosh, I haven't done anything outside of music or audio in a really, really long time, but it was just a small incremental thing.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's amazing what you can find online with like Mix with the Masters, or even on YouTube, like free videos of people talking about how a microphone works, why a ribbon microphone is different than like a dynamic
Yeah.
microphone. If you want to sound a certain way, well, this is what the Beatles did. So maybe you can replicate results, but with plugins. Obviously, I didn't have all of these like big fancy tools at my disposal right off the bat,
Hmm.
but there were plugins that I could play with and see if I could make things sound the way I thought they should sound.
Hmm.
And so it really was just me kind of bumping around in the dark and hoping that, something kind of worked in the future.
Yeah.
But there was definitely no formal education. I was lucky that there were people that would let me sit in on recording sessions,
Hmm.
like our mutual friend Dave
Yeah.
Ogilvy. He'd be at the warehouse and he'd allow a few people to maybe come by and watch him work, or I got to work with your brother when he was working with one of the bands that I had, that I was playing for at the time, and I got to watch him and how fast he was and how everything that he just seemed to think about, he could translate into the computer or onto the console, and that sort of thing. I wasn't necessarily learning the technical aspect of things, but I was definitely learning like the amount of passion and love that needs to go into every project. Because when you go into a big recording session and you see a really impressive producer or musician or whatever work, you just see their eyes light up.
Yeah.
And it's not a job. It's this incredible amount of passion that's all just kind of coming out all at the same time. And I mean, that was a good lesson
Yeah.
to learn for sure. So I guess that was my sort of that was my
Yeah,
my
well, and I
training, I
think
guess.
that would fall into that sort of, mentorship, even if it wasn't like an official mentorship, where that's a really specific thing that I think we don't look at so much in musician development, maybe because that's usually either structured formal lessons or you're doing it by ear and by playing with your friends and like learning on the fly. But I think for the parts of the industry that are more on the technical side, like things like recording audio, or I had Emma Higgins do an interview and she was talking about the process of learning filmmaking and, you know, working towards that end of things. And those pieces where mentorships, official or unofficial, where you get to hang with people that are better than you and watch them work and learn how they're doing what they're doing. That is a really important piece of the learning process in the industry that shouldn't go, you know, I can't find the word that I want. Unnoticed, unacknowledged. There it is.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. Um, so I mean, to that end, without so I was trying to make sure people understand. I am not asking, because I ask this question fairly frequently. I'm not necessarily asking you to name names. You can answer it however you like, but the point isn't like, I want you to drop names. I am asking you, what have been the most important relationships in your career? What kinds of relationships have been really pivotal in the course of your career? And that can be personal or professional.
Right, yeah. I think first and foremost, the most important relationship that I've had in my career has
Hmm.
been my wife. Because I mean, when I met her, I was so incredibly broke, and I was working so many hours, and I don't think that I would have wanted to hang out with myself back then. Like I was a disaster. I mean, I had a lot of high hopes and dreams, and there was definitely a lot of aspiration there. But I mean, the reality was I was a
Mm,
tough hang for sure. But she has been beside me this entire time. When I told her that I wanted to take out a big loan to put together, a little recording studio here in Vancouver, she
mhm,
was all for it. She 100% always believed in me. And I think that is a very uncommon thing. I
mhm,
think that, like having someone that can look at you and be like, yeah, you're spending more than what you would normally make
mhm,
in a year
mhm,
on basically a dream, and it's going to probably negatively affect us for the next couple of years. And she was like, you owe it to yourself
mhm.
to do it. You need to do it. And I feel so lucky to have her
Yeah.
on my side. And even now that things maybe have gotten a little bit easier, I'm still on the road
Mhm,
half the year. And she's right there with me saying, yeah, you need to do this. You clearly are so happy when you're on the road, and making, you're realizing your dreams really, and I feel
yeah.
very lucky about that. There's never been any pressure of her saying you need to just stop what you're doing and kind of fall into line with what the status quo is, or what the 9 to 5 sort of
Yeah.
work life would be. So
And
I feel
I
very
mean,
lucky.
I want to second that having a partner who is your biggest fan and your biggest supporter and is going to go to the ends of the earth to like fight for you and your dreams, that is irreplaceable. And I think when you're chasing big dreams, whatever they are, if you are in a relationship, that's the kind of relationship that it kind of needs to be for all the pieces to work, personally and professionally.
Yeah.
And it's just it is really and truly irreplaceable. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tough, it's not an easy road to
Yeah.
take for either
Yeah.
myself nor my wife, and so yeah, I feel very, very lucky about that. Regarding some other people that I've been I found have been some of the best relationships, that are actually a lot of the same people that I kind of started doing music with in my
Hmm.
in my 20s, the people that have stuck with it. Because when we were younger, we would kind of joke, well, like, imagine making it, imagine, like only doing music, like what a crazy wild adventure that must be. And now, I'm we're all
Hmm.
10 years older now, or 15 years older now, and we're all or at least the people that have stuck with it, were doing it at a professional capacity, and those are the people that I'm learning from. I can call my good friend
Hmm.
Spencer at the Armory. We knew each other from the early 2010s when he was a runner and I was just getting hired for some little things here and there. And now he's the head engineer there, and we do a ton
Yeah.
of records together. And anytime he's got a question, he can call me. I can call him. When we're in the studio, we can talk about, we just came up, or I recently came across this new sort of technique. What do you think about
Yeah.
that? And we can talk about it. I think that those have been probably the best relationships that I've had, and to watch everyone kind of grow together
Hmm.
at the same pace has been really exciting and
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah. That's a really cool thing when you get to all develop in your own ways, but as a peer group instead of outgrowing your peer group,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
or growing apart from your peer group.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty special thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the transition from being a live performer or being a performer in a band to working in music for film and television? Most people don't just like fall into that line of work. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you started to work in that
Sure.
part of the business?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from being a live performer be completely honest, I've always had like crazy anxiety
Hmm.
of being on the stage. Like I never really had fun doing it. It was always exhausting. I felt sick afterwards. Like it was what I thought I needed to do to be,
Right.
a rock star. So that's why I was willing to do it, but it wasn't enjoyable for me. So from there, transitioning into the recording studio side of things, I thought, wow, this is great. It's we're in a room. It's a safe space. I can make mistakes. No one's ever going to hear it. We can just edit it
Hmm.
out later, which is really why I fell in love with the recording studio instantly. And then from there, after just kind of being in the studio and learning the ins and outs, from there into film was a really strange jump, and it kind of came out of nowhere. It was totally unplanned. Someone that I believe that we both know,
Yeah.
Roger Monk, who is an incredible engineer. He's for the viewers that may not know who he is, he's done, I think, the orchestra for Platoon. He did the orchestra for Michael Bublé. He's got a Grammy. Like, he is like an absolute
He's
heavyweight A-class
iconic.
music genius, right? Iconic. Him and I had chatted a little bit because he's got his studio over in Gastown, which isn't too far
Hmm.
away from where I live. One of the people that work at his studio also master a lot of the records that I produce. And I got a call from them one day saying, hey, there's a TV show that's looking for someone to record some music for them. Would you be interested in doing it? And I thought, yeah, sure. I had done a little bit of that before on a TV show called
Hmm.
Big Sky. But I didn't really know what it entailed, and I didn't bother asking what the show was. It just sounded like people were probably going to show up here. We're going to record some music. I'm going to deliver it, and that's going to be it. And at, I think, 8 o'clock at night, I get a call from this like Australian phone number, or it might have been, I can't remember where it was, but it was someone saying, hey, I'm so and so. We're looking to hire someone to record music around the world for The Amazing Race. Like, what a pitch, right? And and I grew up watching The Amazing
Yeah.
Race. I'm like, yeah, bullshit. Like, it's not going to happen. There's no way. And then they were like, well, our head of department will give you a shout in not too long, and you guys can chat about some specifics. I'm like, all right, sure. And meanwhile, I'm like
Mhm.
shaking. I'm just like, oh God, I hope I get this. This is cool. And then the head engineer, or head of department for the audio, Jim, he calls and he's like, "Hey Jeff, I got your name from Roger Monk. He actually hired me in the studio as an assistant or an intern or something like that years and years ago back at, I think it was
Yeah,
Little
yeah, would
Mountain
have been.
Sound." From there, he went over to working in film, mostly doing like dialogue,
Yeah.
location audio, and whatnot. And he's like, and if Roger Monk says that you would be good for the job, we trust his opinion through and through. So what do you say? And I was like, well, I still don't really understand like what we're doing. He's like, basically the pitch is that we're going to fly you around the world and you're going to record music in the weirdest places, and it's going to be in very unideal locations. So you're going to have to come up with how you want to build a kit that is completely self-sustainable and fly around the world and record these things. We're going to set you up with translators and a driver. You're going to fly with the teams basically, and also the crew. And whenever you're not doing music, you can just help us out in other ways. If once you learn kind of how all of this stuff works, and I'm like, sure. So and basically he said, so clear your schedule. Our I think he called him our travel guru is going to contact you, and you're going to be flying down to LA in about 6 days. And I'm like, for how long? And he's like, you should plan to be gone for about 30 to 35 days.
Cow.
And I'm like, holy smokes. So I've got 6 days basically just to rearrange the next month, all of my clients and I was very lucky to have some very, very understanding clients where, I said, can we just push it forward a month? And it just worked out that it didn't seem to get in the way of anyone else's schedule, and I got to kind of go with it. And I really didn't believe it was happening until I got on that flight. Like, it really didn't make sense to me. Like, it just seemed so ridiculous. But yeah, I got down there and I built myself a little kit for remote locations, and just kind of got thrown into it. There was no one else that was doing it, so I didn't really get a chance to talk to anyone about how it should be done. Mm-hmm. It was a matter of just kind of figuring it out. Yeah. Obviously, I had a lot of help from the head of department, him saying, well, you should consider this, you should try this. But it was a lot of open-ended, you should look into this. That might be what you're looking for, but make the decision yourself. So it was really cool.
Sourcing was it local cultural music that you were recording? Is that the deal?
Yeah. So at a lot of the different competitions and whatnot in the shows, we'll have local musicians. And the tricky thing is that when contestants are running in, there's a bunch of noise. There's, camera people running around everywhere. It is an absolute zoo. And so the audio of the bands never really cut through very nicely. So they decided that they were going to create this job to kind of pre-record all of the bands that you would see on television, and then they can stitch it into the show afterwards to give a high fidelity stereo recording of what the bands do. So they basically shoot me a message at about 6 a.m. in the morning when I'm on the road, and they'll say, hey, you're going to go meet with this band, and you've got X amount of hours to pre-record with them. Your driver will be your translator, and have at her. And then I show up and I'm like, so how many songs are we doing? Have you guys spoken to the producers? What exactly are we looking to achieve here? And a lot of the times the band knows a lot more about it than I do. And then I ask them to play for me. We set up the microphones. We'll do a number of takes. I'll play it back for them. I'll kind of mix it real time, at least a rough mix for them, real time. Play it back, make sure they're happy with it, and then pack everything up, go back to the hotel room, mix it, and then hop on a flight the next day sometimes.
So that's really feet to the fire. Hey? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the one thing that I know about the studio process, not being any kind of engineer myself, I mean, I can edit in Pro Tools, but don't ask me to use a plugin. I can just literally edit, and that's it. I can't set stuff up. I can't, nothing. Somebody else has to do all of that. So, but I have been in studios my whole life, and my family has always owned a studio. And so what I have seen firsthand over and over and over again is that in the recording process, if something can go wrong, it will. And that a good 50%, if not more, of quote unquote studio time is detective time, trying to figure out why something is not working. And I think people who don't spend any time in studios have no concept of that about the recording process. But if you're recording and all you have is your grab and go kit that you have put together, you have a very limited amount of gear with which to work to troubleshoot or replace
Yeah.
or trade
Yeah.
out or whatever. So that is like terrifying and must have really been also super creative, actually. Like you must have had to come up with some really creative solutions.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, no, it's I mean, you would look at it and it doesn't look very creative. It just looks like a mess of wires and antennas and, and buttons and knobs. But you're absolutely right when you say that when you're in studio, a
Hmm.
lot of the time is detective work. It's a lot of troubleshooting and making things work. And one of the big stresses that I really try to kind of live by is that when I'm building the kit before any season, I need to make sure everything works in and out and
Hmm.
have backups and have replacements, and something will break and something will go wrong. And sometimes you're in, you know, sometimes you're in the Middle East, and if you need a microphone, chances are you're not going to be able to find it because
Hmm.
I'm in and out in two
Hmm.
days, sometimes 3 days. So sourcing something that quickly is only possible in LA. That's the only and New York. This is the only places that you can basically find things that fast, especially
Yeah.
very specialized things like this, right? So yeah, so it's really a matter of making sure everything is 100% bulletproof, and then also really trying to
Yeah.
make everything flight friendly, because as we all know, music equipment it's heavy and it's breakable, and it's kind of yeah, not easy to carry around. So just building things like, for instance, my mixer, I can basically, I have it on a strap so I can carry it around my chest
Hmm.
as like a carry on onto planes, and then and then I've got a couple of Pelican cases, and one holds a dozen
Yeah.
microphones, and then the other one holds like backup
Yeah.
batteries and stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. Everything that can go wrong certainly will go wrong, and it's going to be somewhere where
You
you
just got to MacGyver
have
shit
no
at that
access to
point,
any of these
right?
things.
But
That's
you
right. Yeah.
also
Yeah.
like I'm just actually quite in awe of that job because you got to do something that you love to do and is really creative, and you got to and get to, because I know this is sort of an ongoing gig, you get to see like the world doing it. You've been, and like the Amazing Race doesn't go to just your normal places, they go to some really exotic, off the beaten track kind of places, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Which really allows me to uh,
Yeah.
firsthand experience some of the craziest music that I would have never been exposed to otherwise, right? Like working with some like drumline type bands, there's these wild rhythms that I just still can't wrap my head around, and these instruments that I think it's a lute, but it's something else, I think it's just called a harp, but no, it's something else, and asking the people about like like learning about the instruments, and really coming to appreciate all of this music that we just don't have access to, or are mostly not
Hmm.
exposed to here in like North America. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Do you find that your production at home in the studio, and I guess, I mean, we should probably talk about your production process first before I ask this question, because some producers are totally hands off in terms of anything that crosses the line over into the writing realm, and some producers are more involved in that realm. My question is, do you find that all of the music that you've been exposed to around the world, does any of that come back with you and impact the way you approach production or writing back at home?
I really think it does. I think that one of the ways that I look at the field recording sort of stuff is that you
Hmm.
you can't make anything sound too pretty. Like you can't take an outside
Hmm.
recording and make it sound like it's a studio recording. It's more about really leaning into some of the um,
Hmm. Hmm.
leaning into the deficiencies, or leaning into the trying to
Hmm.
find the errors and making them more obvious. and so like when I'm on the road, it forced me to realize that, well, I'm trying to make these studio recordings. It's impossible when you're outside, because there's maybe people walking by, or we're in a loud outdoor market. So just throw up a microphone,
Mm-hmm.
a stereo mic, and try to capture some
Yep.
of that ambience and let it be in the audio, because it sounds real. And I think that what that taught me was that when I'm here in the studio, sometimes the things that sound a little bit off kilter, things that sound a little bit fucked up or wrong, are actually the thing that
Yeah.
resonates with people the most, or actually the things that are the coolest. You can listen to the most polished, brilliantly written song, but if it doesn't have any teeth, to me, it doesn't have that same heart. It doesn't draw me in
Yeah.
the same way that something
Yeah.
that's a
The
little bit fucked
imperfections
up might.
can be the thing that
Yeah.
make it the most relatable,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
And so that was one of the things that I really learned from being on that show. Yeah.
Um, are there any other notable differences on the production side when you are recording for pop artists versus recording for film and TV?
Yeah, I would say the closest thing that I ever did to recording, like studio types recordings for film and TV, would be Big Sky. And one of the things that I learned quickly with that show, that basically what they were doing is, it was a very music heavy show. All 4 or 6 of the actors and actresses would
Hmm.
need to pre-record all the vocals, because they were all like stacked harmonies, and then they would
Hmm.
basically have a playback operator on set, and they would lip sync to it. So we would do all the pre-records here, and something that I learned really quickly was how much preparation went into these big TV shows, especially when it comes to vocals. Like, I wasn't producing, but I was the engineer on it, and the producer would show up with he would have hired a professional singer to already sing all the parts and all the harmonies, and then he would also take all of the vocal melody parts, he would piano roll them in, so they would have pitch cues basically of everything. And then on top of that, I think he had other options as well. And basically that way, when the actors would come in,
Hmm.
he could play them all of these different
Wow.
options, and they could pick what was going to be best for them. And I thought, wow, that is
Yeah.
spectacular, because most of the time it's pretty fly by the seat of your pants when you're in a studio. It's very like time crunch. No one's going to be sitting in there drawing in notes on a piano roll, being like, here's your harmony. But yeah, they put in so much extra work into it, and it was inspiring to me, and I learned a lot of tricks from that for sure.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I know I've done a bit of work with like as a vocal coach for a couple of Disney projects where like I worked for the production for Freaky Friday and for Descendants 3 and worked with some of the actors before they recorded their parts.
Yeah,
And it was interesting because you're working with actors who aren't first and foremost singers, they are first and foremost actors. So exactly what you're talking about, where sometimes the language or the cues or what they need really honestly does look different than people who are coming to it spending their life immersed in music and have that as a second language. And being the more options you can give, the better. And the clearer you can
yeah.
ask for what you need, the better.
Yeah, and the last thing you'd ever want to do is to have an artist or an actor show up to the
Yeah.
studio and they feel like they can't meet the job requirements. So you don't want an actor that's,
Yeah.
in a TV show showing up and feeling like they're underperforming
Yeah.
because you're not giving them the right tools. Because that's all it is, really. It's not that they're a bad singer or whatever. It's just there's just different techniques that resonate with them better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's the job of, me as the coach, you as
And
the
yeah,
producer, the musical director, prepping the tracks. It's like all of those people, ultimately, it's all of our jobs to get the actor to the best performance, give them what they need to have the best performance at the end of the day and to provide those tools. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, like you just learn more and more tricks along the way that really, that
Yep.
that help people. And maybe one technique will only work with one client that you'll ever work with ever again, but that is an incredibly good technique to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in today, you guys. That was only the first half of my interview with Jeff. I will be back on Thursday, so make sure you tune back in where you're going to hear all the rest of the good stuff that Jeff has to tell us about his really interesting career path. Producing as an artist and doing the music for The Amazing Race and some Disney stuff and, just some pretty cool stuff. So make sure you tune back in on Thursday. We'll see you